I kill monsters for an interdimensional government. Here are some stories. Part 6. Written by HHeyPeter. Welcome back, folks. I trust you're all doing okay, right? The holidays are far behind us, and it's back to the daily grind. So I decided to boot up my computer and get around to continuing this series. Strange to think about how I've been writing these for 4 months now. It feels like just yesterday I uploaded the first part out of sheer curiosity and managed to stay alive long enough to keep doing so. I wanted to thank you guys and gals for sticking around and reading these. You make my day. Anyway, sorry for the long intro. Let's get on with the story. What started out as a regular day of me eating copious amounts of fish after my squats quickly turned sour as my phone started to ring with an unfamiliar number. Typically, I didn't respond to numbers that I didn't have saved, but I was preoccupied with eating, so I checked without thinking. Almost immediately, I regretted my decision as I heard a voice I was wholly unprepared to hear. "Hey, you there? It's me, Connor. Remember when I asked you to meet up with me later? Well, I'm cashing in that check now. Let's talk." Connor's voice sounded about as aloof and carefree as I did before I ran into him at the old abandoned mansion a couple of parts back. I choked on my fish in surprise and tried to form a coherent response. "You spooked me out, bud," I responded. "Where were you wanting to meet? I'm open all day." Connor clicked his tongue and huffed softly in thought for a brief moment, then gave me his answer. He told me to meet him at an address that didn't ring any bells, along with some instructions to dress casually. I wasn't assuming that I'd be wearing slacks and loafers to meet with someone I barely know, but his recommendation was appreciated anyways. "Is 6 o'clock all right? We're doing this at 6. He stated like he was in a hurry and wanted to hang up quickly. I kept affirming him until he hung up the phone suddenly, leaving me out to dry with the sound of silence. I hung up on my end of the line and put my phone down, trying to picture how a meeting with this guy would go down. Ever since the mishap at the old house, I knew in my gut that he couldn't be trusted. He definitely knew more than he let on if his grave reaction to me going inside the old house to do my job was any indication. Through means that remain unexplained to me, he is entrenched in the world of the supernatural in ways that I don't comprehend, and I was going to dive headfirst into the lion's den. I hate to admit it, but I was feeling more than a little anxious on my drive to the location he gave me. Given my line of work, I shouldn't be feeling nervous at all. I've killed things that most people only see in nightmares, so why do I worry so much just going to a casual meeting? I played some music from a CD to ease my nerves and followed the directions my GPS set out for me. About an hour later, I arrived at a single, lonely house facing a brown snow-drenched road. The house looked all but abandoned, with layers of fresh old snow caking the roof like frosting, a worn white door, and an old unshoveled driveway with an indistinguishable car. My gut feeling went off like a siren as I mentally planned an escape route in case I needed it. Break the front window, run to the car, and don't look back, I told myself. I got out of the car, stomped my way through the snow, and hastily knocked on his door, tightly gripping my knife through my pocket. I heard approaching footsteps from inside the house, along with the various clicks and metal wrenching from a large lock being unfastened. The door swung open and nearly smacked me in the nose. Connor stared at me with hazy eyes that were half closed. He gave me a goofy smirk when our eyes met and brushed his long, dry hair out of his face. Hey, glad you made it. Glad to see you," he said lazily. Without waiting for a response, he waved me inside. "Come on in, take your shoes off, we can talk over some grub." I reluctantly stepped inside his house and rubbed my boots on his sodden carpet by the door, then unlaced them and placed them neatly by the wall. The smell of cheap microwavable food permeated through his house and eased my tension, and, against my better judgment, made me feel welcome and comfortable. Before I could unbutton my coat, I heard a rampant set of feet clacking against the laminated wooden floor, and I saw a massive Great Dane charging towards me. He headbutted me at full speed, nearly toppling me on my back. Then he whined at me. I stroked the dog's black mane as it relentlessly licked my hands. "Sven, come here, quit bothering him," Connor called out, and the dog followed his command and charged further into the house. It was at that moment where my perspective on this whole meeting had shifted entirely. I prioritized the danger and mystery of the situation, and I didn't take a second to consider that Connor could just be an average person like everyone else. I only saw the potentially dangerous supernatural aspect that he held, and not the side of him that owned a dog, or didn't do his house chores, or loved the taste of cheap pizza-flavored snacks. I brushed off the dog's hairs on my jacket and folded it under my arm, walking down the hallway. I walked until I ended up in a tiny kitchen space where Connor told me to take a seat on a metal chair at the table as he shuffled various glass plates loaded with smoking pizza bites piled on top to the point of collapsing. Sven snaked around his legs and whined, pointing his nose straight up in the air like an arrow as he begged for a pizza bite. Connor obliged and tossed him one. The dog caught it in the air and gingerly chewed the piping hot treat as pepperoni bits dribbled from his maw. Connor brought over 2 plates of the greasy treats towards the table, placing one in front of me and one for himself. He sat down on the seat opposite me and started picking up the pile of food. "So, how are you doing, James? How's life treating you?" he asked casually through a mouthful of food. "Fine, thanks. I've been just fine," I replied, trying not to clue him into my life. I suspected that he had his own ideas of what I do, but I'm not going to explain it to him. He nodded nonchalantly and wiped the bits of stringy cheese from his mouth with a napkin and placed it beside his plates. Cool. What have you been up to?" "Not much. I've been busy with school and whatnot," I said, trying to keep the details vague to keep him off my back. I've always hated talking about myself in a public environment. It never made me feel at ease. I don't want the people that I see every day knowing too much about me. I don't have this issue online though, hence why I can put all this out there and not get shy when sending it. "So, about the last time that we met up," he said spontaneously. "Why did you go inside the house that I told you not to go inside? What were you thinking, man?" "How did you know what was in there?" I replied, and the tension in the room skyrocketed. The only sound present was of Sven whining for more food at Connor's feet. I needed to find out exactly what he knew, and to do that I decided to try and listen carefully to what he says and try to trap him with his own words. He couldn't make eye contact with me as he shoveled another piece of food into his mouth. Well, everyone in that town knows it. That's why no one goes in there. He tried explaining to me, but he definitely knew that I was on to him. I didn't need to give a reply, I just gave him a cold stare. Almost immediately, he cracked and told me the full story. All right, you got me. I know this kind of stuff, all right? I grew up around it. It's attracted to me like a magnet, he said quietly, as if our conversation was a private one being held near someone else present in the room that shouldn't be hearing it. You grew up around it. Can you explain that to me? I pressed. His lips curled up in discomfort, and he rubbed his hands all over the napkin he had. It's exactly what it sounds like. For a lot of my younger years, I saw a lot of ghostly stuff. I couldn't step out the house without seeing a ritual or two going on. So, what? Was your family into playing with Ouija boards or something? I asked. He looked over his shoulder cautiously and started rhythmically petting Sven, his fingers giving off a slight twitch. He's nervous, I thought to myself. If he's nervous enough to display those tics, then I've got him on the ropes. Connor wiped his palms on his shirt and cleared his throat. I was in a cult, he said. It was so sudden and methodical that it took me a couple of seconds to process what he said. A cult, like Scientology? I don't doubt that's a rough way to live, but what kind of cult are we? It wasn't that type of cult. He interrupted me, waving his hands defensively. It's super secret, like 0 results on Google kind of secretive. Point is, they had their hands in a lot of different bowls. And the things I saw there kind of, insisted upon itself. I was at a loss. How was I supposed to respond? His answer had only given me more questions that I wanted to ask. Did you have any family in that cult? How did you get out? What is this cult? I went ahead and I asked the third question, preparing for a vague answer. The International Triarch Association is what they're called, but everyone shortens it to ITA. I can promise you, they're unlike any cult that you've ever heard of before, man. I was the equivalent of a cabin boy there, so I don't have any answers on their inner workings, but they have things there that would blow your mind. He elaborated, slowly regaining confidence in his voice. He was right about one thing. I had never heard of ITA in my life. What kind of things do they have in there? You mentioned that they dabble with the supernatural. So, do they have some kind of artifact? By now, our plates of food had gotten cold, so Connor had pushed his away from his side of the table. Okay, you're not going to believe me when I say this, but they have tech that would blow your mind, he stated, stretching his arms outwards to try and communicate the breadth of this technology. I'm talking like power armor. They have so many lethal poisons that it makes the US government look like a joke. I have no idea how they got their hands on this, but they have it. You try to expose their secrets and... I stopped listening to his voice when some major gears in my head started to click together. Somehow, it almost felt familiar to hear about this cult, but in a grim way, like an unearthing of a traumatic childhood memory. It was on the tip of my tongue and I had to get to the bottom of it. "Connor," I said, sounding stern enough to stop his ranting that I wasn't listening to anyway. "Does the ITA have a logo made up of 3 skulls?" I asked, feeling a new sensation of a chill sweeping through the room. I was just about to say that's their logo," he said. As soon as those words left his lips, I felt an intense pressure clench my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I know what the ITA is. I encountered them some time ago in the past, and I've never forgotten it. Close to a year ago, they took part in a raid on my old school during an outbreak of hostile creatures, which is what led me to becoming an assassin in the first place. I knew what these people were capable of. They would have wiped my mind and made me forget the entire incident, or done God knows what to me if they caught me after the deal I made with Boss. I felt my clothes start to stick to my body with sweat, and I shuffled uncomfortably in my seat. "Connor, I know these people," I said, out of breath. He looked just as horrified as I felt. You do? How do you know them?" he said. At this point, I abandoned my plan of not going into detail. My need to understand the ITA far outweighed it. I left my rationality and logic out the door and replaced it with raw emotional inquisitiveness. It was tough to explain everything to him, but I managed to do it, leaving me out of breath and Connor stunned. I became aware of my stomach rumbling from lack of food, so I pulled the plate of food he had put in front of me and started munching on it liberally. "Man, what a coincidence, eh?" said Connor, exhaling heavily. "For the record, I'm not going anywhere near those guys," I added, which earned me an approving nod from Connor. "Well, obviously," he chuckled. In hindsight, coming here was therapeutic. It was uncomfortable to really analyze our shared experiences, but it was also comforting at the same time. I felt like I understood Connor a little more now, and I can appreciate his laid-back attitude now that I know the more troubling aspects of his life. "It's kinda lonely being here all by myself. Thanks for coming to visit me, man. I'm glad to have you back anytime," he said gleefully, and I couldn't help myself but let out a small smile. Yeah, no problem," I told him. I had gotten up from my chair to leave until Connor got up first and pointed upstairs. "Before you go, I gotta show you something cool. I did you a favor," he said, running down the hallway and up a set of carpeted stairs, motioning for me to follow him. I did as I was asked and followed him upstairs, smelling a terrible scent as I did. We entered his cluttered bedroom and I dodged all the strewn laundry and pillowcases. He dodged up to his closet and stood in front of it like he was presenting something revolutionary at a TED Talk. "So I went ahead and did a neat little favor for you," he announced, sounding proud. "Oh, really? That's awful kind of you, but you didn't have to," I replied. "Don't worry, I got your back," he continued. He opened the sliding closet door like he was pushing back a red curtain to show me the crumpled corpse of what looked like a goblin with sickly green skin. It had a colossal indent between its bulging eyes. Somehow, the corpse was entirely bloodless. Instead, it had trails of dirt that were streaked across its face and began to make piles on the floor. It smelled like sulfur dunked in pickle juice. I recoiled in disgust and shielded my nose with my hand. Why do you have that thing in your closet? Why would you even show me? I told him, disgusted. He smiled awkwardly and shook his head. Calm down, man. I just wanted to show you that I can help you go ghost busting or whatever you do, he explained. I suppose it's possible that this kill could have been mine in due time, but Connor went ahead and did it as some type of favor. On the one hand, I was disgusted that he had bothered to show me a corpse in the closet, but I was kind of thankful that he's offering to help me in my killing endeavors. I don't think that boss would want me to take him up on that offer, but I'm glad that he made it nonetheless. When I finished being shocked, I pointed out the giant indent in his head. Did you use a sledgehammer to get this thing? Look at the size of the dent in its head, I said, pointing at the wound. Hammer? Nah, I used… He trailed off as he reached into his closet and pulled out his weapon. I used this. What Connor pulled out looked like a brand new monkey wrench that came straight out of a sci-fi film. It had a pristine white handle with purple accents running up to the tip. It had an abnormally sharp curve to the area intended for tightening bolts. It looked like someone took a knife to it and tried to sharpen its edges for combat, and they succeeded. I was curious as to where he got it, but I wasn't able to summon the energy to ask him. Hey, it was nice meeting with you and all, but I've got a split, I told him. He took the wrench and started playing with it like it was a butterfly knife, flipping it around his fingers with masterful precision. All right, catch you on the flip side then. I've got your number if you want to meet up again, he said, spinning the wrench on his finger like a baseball. I waved Connor goodbye and made my way back downstairs, giving Sven a stroke across the ears as he stood upon the table to eat the leftover food that we had left. Soon enough, I put on my boots and jacket and headed back home, where I promptly collapsed into bed and fell asleep. The more I think about it, Connor is really stranger than some of the things in the night that I end up killing. A nice guy, but a lot to handle. Well, that's all I've got for now. I'll go ahead and warn everyone that uploading might be a bit slow in the time coming. Slower than usual, I mean, because Mom and Dad are hitting the booze a little too hard and it's starting to affect what little of a household dynamic we have. So, I've got to deal with that. I promise to give you guys an especially great story the next time I return. As always, stay safe. Jamie.